Okay, we are recording. And let me get our PowerPoint up here. I have a very lonely kitty, so if you see a little black tail go past, that's when, then there she is. Okay. This is Tana Dancer. If you guys, we got one person here that doesn't know her, she's my office cat. So, all right, we are doing module 2. And so a lot of module 2 is risk analysis and penetration testing. So the study of penetration testing involves defining what it is and why such a test should be conducted, examining who should perform the test and the rules for engagement, hint, hint, know how to perform a penetration test. Penetration testing attempts to exploit vulnerabilities in order to help uncover new vulnerabilities, provide a clearer picture of their nature, and determine how they could be used against the organization. The most important element in a pen test is the first step, and that is planning. And I cannot stress that enough. Plan, plan, plan. And because if you don't plan everything out beforehand, you can run into a lot of problems and it can cause all sorts of issues. We might get Zach back, by the way. We'll know Wednesday on that. We're just kind of in limbo right now. Okay, so you can do what's called project creep. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. That is where your project starts to expand beyond your initial set of limitations. And that just causes, eventually you have like this nice, well thought out program, and then you get project creep, and then you end up with this huge never ending project. And it's very dangerous if you ever want to have solid end dates. Project creep is a very big issue. And then most dangerous result of poor planning is, of course, unnecessary legal issues. And you definitely don't want those, because penetration testing, if you don't get the proper clearance, depending on what you're testing, you can get arrested for it. So why conduct a test? A scan of network defenses usually finds only surface problems, and many network scans are automated and provide only a very limited verification of vulnerabilities. So they're like, hey, yep, something's vulnerable. And then you're like, okay, well, that's great. So what do we do about it? And it's like, I don't know. So that's why you do penetration testing. Penetration tests can find deep vulnerabilities and attempts to exploit those vulnerabilities using manual techniques. The attacks must be the same as those used by a threat actor, and they should follow the thinking of threat actors. So generally speaking, they design them like real world situations. This is that you break in to fix it mentality. So who should perform these? Internal security personnel. The advantages to using internal employees include there is little or no additional cost. They're already on your payroll. The test can be conducted much more quickly. There's not as many contracts and things like that that you have to sign. In-house pen testing can be used to enhance the training of employees and raise awareness of your security risks. Usually once you do, I used to do them every 6 months to a year, depending on how bad I'd notice people doing certain things. And then usually it was a shock for them to go, oh, wow, we didn't realize that. So that's what they want. What?
Isn't it just better to outside in for the testing? Because like inside you're already, well, you're inside already. And then as this is saying, like you obviously know your networks, you know the people that are using your networks.
Yes and no. I think that it's advantageous to do both, honestly. If you always do internal, that's bad. Because like you said, you already know all of the things, and it's not going to give you a realistic if someone from the outside is going to attack you. But when you do an in-house internal, it's more like an audit. Security audit is kind of what it's more like. it gives your people a heads up of, oh, maybe we should fix this so it doesn't actually, cause serious problems. And it's not as expensive. And usually you can get your managers to put the bill for more equipment and things like that for you to do regular scanning, because while your stuff, if you're in a large enterprise, it's amazing the things that other people can get into that you're like, hey, I didn't know that was hooked up out there. Like, I found a Windows XP machine some idiot had hooked up to the network, and I was like, what, this isn't even supposed to be out here. How did this even get on here? And doing that periodically gave me a handle on my network. So it was good for me. But if you're doing it just purely for, seeing how your security posture is, doing it only from the inside is bad. Doing it only from the outside is okay, but sometimes you don't catch things like, hey, maybe we have a door here for insider threat actors that we could maybe tighten up a little more when you do an inside one that might help too.
See, my issue with this is like my experience with penetration testing was all from the army and particularly the guard. And especially with the guard, it was like, hey, look, this is it would be someone along the lines of, we can't tell you that this is going to happen this drill weekend or at this time, but we can't say it's not going to happen.
And
And
that's
then
why you need to have an incident response team, and you need to have it compartmentalized, which a lot of people don't do properly. So, yeah, I get that.
I think it's just, well, from my experience, no one wants to be the one with the egg on their face when everything goes screwy, so they fudge the results.
Yeah, a lot of people do not like to do honest internal auditing. Um, Frequently, it was like fighting an uphill battle with a boulder on my back a lot of the times. But I just got to the point where I was like, hey, do you want to be hacked? And then I would show them data on, this is what I could do, or we could just let it go and you could just, but it depends on where you are and what type of industry you're in. Some industries, like when I worked for the state police, you have to do internal stuff and external stuff because it's part of your certification and accreditation. So it depends on what body you work for. Like if you're accredited by the NSA, you have to do internal audits as well as external audits. So that's just something to think about. So the big, like you were saying, the biggest problem there is inside knowledge, lack of expertise, and reluctance to reveal the problems. So the biggest way to get around that is you have to create your own teams, and you have to actually know what you're doing. A lot of times that's why this is outsourced. I actually found out recently that after I left, the person that they hired after me for the IT security analyst apparently didn't know what they were doing, and they folded the position. So that can happen too. So let's see. There we go. External pen testing consultants. This is a contract with an external pen tester that offers expertise, credentials, experience, and focus. The disadvantage of using external consultants is the usage of the information uncovered. A contractor who conducts a pen test learns all about an organization's network and may receive extremely sensitive information about systems and how to access them. This knowledge could be sold to a competitor. So you have to be very clear on the pen tester's expertise as well as their reputation. And you have to do a lot of research into them. If they have an iffy reputation, obviously you don't want to use them. This is also why if you have a brand new pen testing company, a lot of people won't use them. Yeah, well, it depends. If you don't write up a contract well enough, and there's a loophole in the contract, then they can get out of the contract and go, hey, we didn't technically say we couldn't do this. And if you don't have a legal team that didn't review that contract, you're SOL. So having a good contract is also a big part of having a pen testing consultant. A lot of times small companies, yeah, there's a lot of money in there. That being said, if you are interested in penetration testing, it is a big field with a lot of openings. So this is an excellent field if you want to expand it to it. Then there's also what are called crowdsourced penetration testers. These are like the bug bounty boards. Bug bounty is a monetary reward given for uncovering software vulnerabilities. Bug bounty programs take advantage of crowdsourcing, which involves obtaining input into a project by enlisting the services of many people throughout the internet. The advantage of crowdsourced pen testers include faster testing, resulting in quicker remediation of vulnerabilities, ability to rotate teams so different individuals test the system, and you have the option of conducting multiple pen tests simultaneously. So, I mean, you literally have thousands, possibly thousands of people that are doing that. Bug bounties have been really good for especially large corporations because a lot of nerds really, we just want to break stuff because it's fantastically interesting to be like, oh, look what I can do. And we're not trying to be jerks. And if they're like, hey, if you break this and you tell us how you broke it, we'll give you money, that's usually a huge incentive. So it's depends on how you turn it in for bug bounties. It's usually a first come, first serve. So if a whole bunch of people find it, or if they're like in a team, everyone on that team gets part of the bounty. If there's like a whole bunch of people individually, it's whoever turns it in first. So it depends on, yeah, it's usually like 1,000, sometimes depending on the company, depending on the vulnerability, sometimes 25,000. You can see some fairly large bounties out there. Okay, knowledge check. What is the first step in penetration testing and what is its importance? Planning, because lack of planning can result in legal issues. Targeting, because the pen tester must know which systems to attempt to penetrate. Targeting, the targets will determine which tools are needed for pen testing. Planning, but this step can often be skipped if the tester is in a hurry. I really hope, yeah, I was gonna say, I really hope everyone, very funny. Okay. Planning. You don't want to get sued. When I had a couple of people that did wanted to do pen testing for their capstones. One group was able to get through it. They had to jump through a lot of hoops, had a lot of contracts they had to sign. The other group, the people they were going to do the pen testing for eventually backed out, and they had to find another project to do because they considered it to be too much of a risk. So keep that in mind for future projects. Okay, rules of engagement. Pay attention. Rules of engagement and penetration testing are its limitations or parameters. Categories for rules of engagement are, and usually when you do like a contract, you have rules of engagement that you work out with the people and you list everything out. So timing, you put the dates, the times when you're going to do things, scope, everything that you're going to test. Authorization, cannot stress that one enough. They did what's called a drop test in one of the penetration sections where they dropped thumb drives, and because there was security cameras and things like that involved, if they had not had prior authorization, there's a good chance they could have gotten arrested. Keep that in mind. So remember, you need to have authorization. Exploitation, what are you going to be exploiting? Communication, that is a huge one. Usually you have to have a central person that you communicate with. A lot of times you have to have one person within the department that you're talking to, just so they know kind of the steps that are in there. You can't obviously tell them, hey, we're going to do this on it, because then it ruins your results, but they do have to be aware of certain details. Cleanup, if you break anything, obviously you have to fix it. And reporting, you really need to have a good report. And usually you have to have a couple of different types of reports. You need to have a report aimed at your IT staff with all your technical details. Then you need to have one aimed at your executive staff, which is going to not have any of your like huge technical details and things like that. It's going to have all of the like big picture. This is what we found. This is how it's going to help you type stuff. So guess we're going to go all over it again. Timing parameters set when the test will occur. So start and stop dates of the test should be, should the active portion of the pen test be conducted during normal business hours? A lot of times they try not to do them during normal business hours unless you're doing things like social engineering. Your scope involves several elements to define relevant test boundaries. Your environment, internal, external targets, target locations, and other boundaries. So if you have like multiple buildings and things like that, that will be included in there too. Authorization, like I was talking about, and written prior approval. Make sure you have a record of everything and make sure that you have multiple people that sign off on it. And usually if there's a legal department, have them sign it too, cover all your bases. Even when I worked for certain places, I made sure I had all of that just in case. You hear random bird noises, the cat found a bird toy. Exploitation. The exploitation level in a pen test should be part of the scope that's discussed in the planning stages. Communication, the pen tester should communicate with the organization during the following occasions. So when you initiate it, what's the incident responses, the status, and any emergencies. Cleanup, pen tester must ensure that everything related to the pen test has been removed, any software, hardware, anything. Cleanup involves removing all software agents, scripts, executable binaries, temporary files, and backdoors from all affected systems. Any credentials that were changed should be restored, and any usernames created should be removed. A lot of times when you're doing these, companies will give you special access that they wouldn't normally have, just so that you're outside of the regular things, if you have to do certain portions of it. Reporting, once the pen test is complete, report should be generated to document the objectives, methods used, and results. And like I said, there's two parts: your executive summary designed for less technical audience, and the technical summary written for a security professional. And then you have your little vulnerabilities by type. A lot of the times missing patches, which if you have done anything in security, then you'll know that already. So lack of OS hardening, network design flaws, lack of application hardening, weak passwords. Honestly, I think there's probably more of those than they account for. Incorrect configuration and other. Other is just the catch-all oops section for things that you couldn't possibly know were going to happen. And with any sort of technology, there's always going to be extra stuff. Yeah.
Wouldn't the other be the 23% other be the human factor?
Yeah, that would definitely be the human factor. That's the oops, Bob decided to set his coffee cup on the server and took out, half of our network with one poorly placed coffee cup. No, that's not actually something that's happened that I've seen, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. So, yeah, the phishing attempts, don't even get me started on that. There are so many bad phishing examples, and just a phenomenal rate of failure usually when you do penetration testing. So performing a successful pen test involves determination, resolve, and perseverance. A variety of actions take place when performing a pen test. However, they can be grouped into two phases. There's the reconnaissance phase, and then there's the actual penetration. Phase one, the reconnaissance. The first task is to perform preliminary information gathering from outside the organization. This is called footprinting. Information can be gathered using two methods. There's called active and passive reconnaissance. Active reconnaissance is when you actively go out and touch and get into things. Passive is like if you have a sniffer or something that just pulls information in and doesn't actively have to get into any systems. So like it says there, war driving is an example of active reconnaissance. This is searching for wireless signals from automobiles or on foot while using a portable device. There's what's called war flying. This uses drones, which are officially known as unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs. Disadvantage of active reconnaissance is that the probes are likely to alert security professionals that something unusual is occurring. The more passive reconnaissance that you can do, the better. Yeah, the stuff that you can do with drones, although I did see a hilarious thing on well, not hilarious, but a lot of people with drones got called out in Washington, I guess, because a lot of idiots are flying their drones into the fire areas and blocking the responders who are, you know, actually out there trying to put out fires. And I'm like, ta-da, idiots, you know. So if you're going to be doing stuff like that, just make sure that you don't do anything really incredibly dumb with your UAV. Okay, so like I said, passive using your like sniffers and things like that. A lot of times you can do a lot of things for open source intelligence. Have you guys heard of the Wayback Machine? That's have any of you heard of that? Couple, okay. So the Wayback Machine is basically a massive caching of old web pages. And a lot of times you can go back and look at websites and then look at previous versions of them and see a lot of unsecured information that you wouldn't see on the correctly configured current website. So that's an example of open source intelligence gathering. So a pen test is intended to simulate actions of your threat actors. The initial system compromised usually does not contain the data that is the goal of the attack. Usually what they do is they get in and then they pivot to something else. That system serves as the gateway for entry into the organization's network, like I said. Once inside the network, threat actors turn to other systems to be compromised until they reach the ultimate target. Sometimes they will just get in and see what they can get to and see how much damage they can cause. The lessons to be learned from how threat actors work include when a vulnerability is discovered, pen testers must determine how to pivot or turn to another system using another vulnerability to continue moving towards the target. Vulnerabilities that are not part of the ultimate target can still provide a gateway to the target. Pen tests are manual, therefore, the pen tester needs to design attacks carefully. Pen testers must be patient, and persistent, just like the threat actors. So a lot of times, for example, one of the things that we had to ban the most was what are called IoT devices, Internet of Things devices, because they are just most oftentimes a really great way for people to get in to your network and then pivot to other more juicy areas for them to get into. Okay, knowledge. What are the two primary phases of penetration testing in order? Penetration, escalating, penetration pivot, reconnaissance footprint, reconnaissance penetration. Good. Yep. D it is. Vulnerability scanning. In some ways, this is a complement to penetration testing. Studying vulnerability scanning involves understanding what it is, how to conduct a scan, how to use data management tools, and how threat hunting can enhance scanning. Okay, what is vulnerability scan? A penetration test is a single event using manual process often performed only after a specific amount of time has passed. A vulnerability scan is a frequent and ongoing process that continuously identifies vulnerabilities and monitors cybersecurity progress. Conducting a vulnerability scan involves knowing what to scan and how often, selecting a type of scan, interpreting vulnerability information, when and what to scan. Two primary reasons for not conducting around-the-clock vulnerability scans are workflow interruptions, that's usually the big one, and technical constraints. A more focused approach is knowing the location of data so that specific systems with high-value data can be scanned more frequently. So this is an example of Nessus hardware vulnerability scanner, like asset management. If you've ever used Nessus, it's actually really fantastic. And I highly suggest, if you ever get a chance to use it, to get in there and get a chance to use it. And you can see, you'll see a little pie chart, and then it'll drop down and tell you all the different operating systems and things like that are out there. And it has a similar one when it tells you what's wrong. No, okay, so it has a similar one that'll tell you, it has like, this one's okay, this one's not so bad, this one, and if you see any red in there, go check that one out first, because you know, red means bad. So because a vulnerability scan should be limited, a configuration review of software settings should be conducted. Define the group of target devices to be scanned. Ensure that a scan should be designed to meet its intended goals. Determine the sensitivity level or the depth of the scan. Specify the data types to be scanned. Types of scans. Two major types of scan are credentialed scans and intrusive scans. In a credentialed scan, a valid authentication credential are supplied to the vulnerability scanner to mimic the work of a threat actor who possesses these credentials. A non-credentialed scan provides no such authentication. An intrusive scan attempts to employ any vulnerabilities that it finds, and a non-intrusive scan does not attempt to exploit the vulnerability, but only records that it was discovered. Vulnerability information. And vulnerability scanning software compares the software it scans against a set of known vulnerabilities. Vulnerability information is valuable to provide updated information to scanning software about the latest vulnerabilities. And they have massive databases on these. So you'll see all sorts of lists of things, and then they're like, hey, we don't know this vulnerability. Would you like to submit it to, if you manage to find something that's not in their database, which I have managed to find a couple times. So examining results. When examining results of vulnerability scan, you should assess the importance of vulnerability as well as its accuracy. Questions that may help identify which vulnerability needs early attention. Can the vulnerability be addressed in a reasonable amount of time? Can the vulnerability be exploited by an external threat actor? If the vulnerability led to threat actors infiltrating the system, would they be able to pivot to more important systems? Is the data on the affected device sensitive, or is it public? Is the vulnerability on a critical system that runs a core business process? Another part of prioritizing is making sure that the difficulty and time for implementing the correction is reasonable. So you don't want to have something super massively difficult and be like, oh, sure, I can fix that in a week, when it's really a year-long project.
So when it's asking about checking the accuracy on the vulnerability, is it talking about just verifying the vulnerability is actually there, or is it like, what does it mean by the accuracy? Is it talking about like how the level of vulnerability, or sorry, I was just a little
You mean the
examining the results. When examining the results of vulnerability scan, you should assess the importance of the vulnerability as well as its accuracy.
sometimes if you don't set the vulnerability scanner settings correctly, you can get some bizarre scans that come out of it. If you run up against certain things, like if you're doing server ones, if you run up against firewall settings and things like that, it's always a good idea to just double check everything. And once you do a couple of them, they have like test ones that you can do when you first start using things like Nessus vulnerability scanner and things like that. You'll get a pretty clear identification just to know, okay, this does not look like it's accurate, or this does look like it's accurate. Most of the time it is accurate, but every once in a while you'll get a wonky like legacy system that you'll get some weird readings off of. So it's just that if double checking your work and knowing that it's a piece of technology, so it's not 100% accurate, and making sure, like usually what I've run into is it'll run into like a firewall, or you haven't set like some sort of port forwarding or something correctly. So it'll run into that and be like, oh, there's actually a big hole here, when really it's some special firewall setting that you've got. So that's usually what's going on. Does that make more sense?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that cleared it up for me. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. And another consideration when examining, there we go, false positives. That's when your alarm is raised when there's no problem. So a means to identify false positive is to correlate the vulnerability scan data with several internal data points. Most common are related to log files, log reviews, or an analysis of log data. So sometimes with the situation I was talking about, if you have something that seems really off, you can run your logs and look against your logs to make sure things are on there. A lot of times, you've worked in a production environment. Have you worked with one that has like a logs server before? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, not off the top of my head.
Okay, so what a log server is it will go out and you can set all your other servers to take their their logs and dump them into one server, and then that server, you go out and check your log data in there, and you can use that to as your false positive correlations and things like that.
Okay.
It's kind of a cool thing, but not everyone uses it. If you don't do that, you have to go out and look at logs on each individual device. So, okay, any questions on that before I get on to data management tools? I don't mind talking more about it if you have questions. I think once you actually see some of it done, it might make a little more sense. Two data management tools that are used for collecting and analyzing vulnerability scan data are security information and event management, or SIEM, and security orchestration automation and response, which is SOAR. SIEM is typically has the following features: aggregation, correlation, automated alerting and triggers, time synchronization, event duplication, and logs. So here is just one of your examples of what a SIEM dashboard looks like. And there's you can see your categories over here, your event alarms, and there's all sorts. You can usually on these dashboards, you can also set custom dashboards too. So this is just probably a generic basic example of what that looks like. They can also perform sentiment analysis, which is the process of computationally identifying and categorizing opinions to determine the writer's attitude toward a particular topic. Sentiment analysis has been used when tracking postings threat actors make in discussion forums with other attackers to better determine the behavior and mindset of threat actors. And then SOAR is similar to SIEM in that it is designed to help security teams manage and respond to security warnings and alarm. SOARs combine more comprehensive data gathering analytics to automate incident response. So that is, SIEM is more hands-on than SOAR. SOAR has more automation in it is kind of what they're aiming for there. All right. Threat hunting. This is a proactive search for cyber threats that thus far have gone undetected in a network. This begins with a critical premise that threat actors have already infiltrated your network. It proceeds to find unusual behavior that may indicate malicious activity. Threat hunting investigations often use crowdsourced attack data such as advisories and bulletins, cybersecurity threat feeds, data feeds of information on the latest threats, information from a fusion center, a formal repository of information from enterprises and government, and the government that used to share information on the latest attacks. All right, knowledge check. Which of the following is not typically a feature of a SIEM? Aggregation, remediation, correlation, or event duplication? Remediation. So remediation is, I like how everyone goes, B. It's fine. Those are new, so don't worry about getting them wrong. As you go, you'll get them.
Quick question on threat hunting. Would that be
Yes.
something like that's included in a penetration test where basically like in the event that you actually penetrate, they would let their IT know and they would start threat hunting trying to find how you got in?
Not typically. If that happens, it's usually an accident, and that means that your penetration tester is really bad. Usually, if you're good enough at penetration testing, you shouldn't hit those kinds of alarms. And if they get to the point where you have a threat hunt in progress while you have a penetration testing team, they usually call off both of them and say, okay, why did this happen? And they, basically it comes to a screeching halt and they have to have both sides talk to each other. At that point, it becomes a red team versus blue team exercise instead of a penetration testing versus threat hunting type thing. So usually
Is it weird that sounds like it could be more fun to me?
It would be more fun, yes, but usually they go and they that's that communication thing, and then they shut everything down. So although red team, they have red team and blue team, and now they have purple team. The purple team is you get to do both. Personally, I like purple team better because that just means you get to attack and defend. So yeah, if you ever get a chance to do the security exercises, red team, blue team, do both if you get a chance. Okay. External cybersecurity resources available to organization, frameworks, regulations, legislation, standards, benchmarks, secure configuration guides, and information sources. A cybersecurity framework is a series of documented processes used to define policies and procedures for implementing and managing security controls in an enterprise environment. The most common frameworks are NIST, and the top two that you see there are actually the two that I've seen the most. And I'm just going to read the side there because otherwise, I'm stumbling over my words a lot. NIST, ISO, AICPA, CIS, and CSA. Those are all the most common ones that you're going to run into. A lot of times when I did my master's work, we did NIST and ISO. And a lot of the big certifications will do NIST and ISO as well. So NIST cybersecurity framework, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Regulations, the process of adhering to regulations is called regulatory compliance. If you do anything with the government, you're going to run into this. Industry regulations are typically developed by established professional organizations. government agencies using the expertise of seasoned security professionals. Sample of cybersecurity regulation categories are broadly applicable regulations, industry-specific regulations, U.S. state regulations, international regulations. Now, the lovely thing about being in the U.S. that we get to deal with is we get to do United States regulations, state by state regulations, and then we have local government regulations. Then we have international regulations. So that's the fun part of being a cyber security professional. You basically have 4 different ones in the United States that you have to deal with. And depending on what you have to work with, you might have more. Legislation. Specific legislation can also be enacted by governing bodies. These include national, territorial, and state laws. Due to a lack of comprehensive federal regulations for data breach notification, many states have amended their breach notification laws from basic definitions. No 2 state laws are the same. They're not kidding. But Idaho, if you go out and look at theirs, they have theirs out there that you can look at. It's not as bad as some states are, but there are better. Standards. A standard is a document approved through consensus by a recognized standardization body. It provides for framework, rules, guidance, or characteristics for products or related processes and production methods. One cybersecurity standard is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. That's the PCI DSS. You'll see that if you do anything having to do with finances. Benchmarks, secure configuration guidelines. These are usually distributed by hardware manufacturers and software developers. They serve as guidelines for configuring a device or software so that it's resilient to attacks. Usually they're, I like how they put usually in there twice. Usually they're platform vendor specific guidelines that only apply to specific products. Guides are available for network infrastructure, OSs, web servers, and application servers. Notably, Internet of Things devices have not been great on catching up to this, which is why the configurations are all over the place on those. Information sources. There are a variety of information sources, including vendor websites, conferences, academic journals, local industry groups, and social media. Remember, some sources are better than others. Just like a wiki is not a good thing to quote in a paper, social media is not the best thing to use as a valid source for cybersecurity information. While it might pique your interest in something, that's great, but always research it. Specialized research source is a request for comments or an RFC. These are white papers document that are authored, up and down late, can you tell? Authored by technology bodies employing specialist engineers and scientists who are experts in their field. So there's some really cool white papers that have been done on all sorts of fun topics. So you can find some really cool things. This is just the basic stuff at the end there. Okay. Any questions before I stop the recording and we go out to YouTube and take a look at the pen testing stuff? Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop here for the lecture and then we'll go look at that. And then I will also put the link for the video out on our Discord server.